Hi, I'm Jeff from New York. Please like and subscribe.
Episode 66, Important Person. The Buddies restaurant was really busy when Steve and the others arrived. It was packed, and there were no tables available. More than 10 guests were already waiting to be seated. It seemed that it would be at least half an hour before they could get a table.
I'll go talk to the manager and see if we can pay him to find us a table.
Teresa said she didn't want to wait any longer. She was hungry, and she was an important person in her town. She couldn't be expected to wait.
Mom, let's just wait.
Andrea said. The Buddies restaurant was famous in New York, and it was always difficult to get a table. Teresa didn't listen to her daughter. With her reputation and her eloquence, she was certain she would be able to get the manager to get them a table quickly. At the front desk, she spoke to the manager and indicated that she would give him an extra $500 to arrange a table for her. But the manager wasn't interested. With such a big restaurant, he probably didn't even need the money. In the end, Teresa was forced to give up.
Mrs. Walters, why don't you sit here and I'll try?
Steve said, standing up. They had all seen Teresa being embarrassed in front of the manager, so he had to do something. Otherwise, Andrea, Rosalie, and Glenda might blame him. Steve walked toward the manager, feeling quite nervous. He wasn't that important, so would the manager embarrass him too? He had heard his father talk about the manager of this Buddies restaurant several times, but he had no idea how well they knew each other. Now that he had been forced into this situation, Steve had to try.
Hello, Mr. Kim.
He said politely as he walked up to the manager.
I'm Steve Phillips. And my father is Martin Phillips from Phillips Construction Company. I've brought a few friends here for dinner. Wonder if you would find us a table.
The owner of Phillips Construction Company.
Mr. Kim knew that Mr. Phillips was just the owner of a medium-sized business. Compared to the other guests at the restaurant, the Phillips family simply wasn't important. He was just about to tactfully reject Steve's request when a few more guests walked through the door. Jeff, Lelaine, and Isabel entered the restaurant and saw the others sitting in the waiting area. So they went over to join them. Mr. Kim was stunned when he saw Jeff and Lelaine. From the behavior of Lelaine and the middle-aged woman, they were mother and daughter. It was obvious that they knew Steve's friends. On an earlier occasion, when Brian had caused trouble for Lelaine, Jeff had ruthlessly beaten him with a wine bottle. Brian had even called Kyle Sanchez and asked for help in dealing with Jeff. But when Kyle had heard Jeff's name, everything had changed. Not only did Jeff not get beaten up, but Brian had to grovel and then clean the floor with his tongue. Jeff was someone that even Kyle Sanchez was afraid of, and he seemed to be here with Steve. If the manager didn't help him find a table, Jeff might get angry and then the entire restaurant would be in trouble. Remembering what had happened to Brian, the manager trembled in fear. He swallowed hard.
Mr. Kim.
Steve asked, puzzled.
What was wrong with the manager?
Oh.
Mr. Kim's gaze shifted to Steve's face.
You want a table, right? Sorry, we made a mistake. I'll arrange something for you and your friends right now. Please wait.
Okay.
Steve agreed, and Mr. Kim immediately hurried off to make the arrangements. Steve was confused.
When did my dad become so powerful?
He thought. He had been worried that since his dad's company was only a medium-sized business, Mr. Kim might not have respected him. He hadn't expected Mr. Kim to agree so quickly when he heard Steve's father's name.
Looks like my father has quite a bit of prestige in New York City after all.
He thought. With that in mind, Steve returned to the waiting area.
Well, why do you think we're still just sitting here?
Teresa was saying to Jeff, clearly annoyed.
This is a restaurant, not a house, so you can't just eat wherever you want.
Then she looked toward Steve.
Steve, it's fine if the manager doesn't have a table. I'm not that hungry, so we can wait for half an hour.
Hey, Mrs. Walters.
Steve said proudly.
I've arranged it with Mr. Kim, and he's gone to find us a table.
Oh.
Teresa was a little taken aback.
You're really something, Steve. I tried, and the manager wouldn't listen to me. You're gone for only a minute or two, and you've already got the manager to agree. Impressive.
She glared at Jeff as she continued.
Unlike some people who ask why we were still sitting here, if you have the power to do something about it, then go and get the manager to give us a table. If you don't have the power, then keep quiet.
She crossed arms and turned her back on Jeff, who nearly sighed. A waitress came over and asked them to follow her upstairs to a private room. The door was labeled VIP Room 888. Inside, the room was spacious and bright. It was decorated with red carpets, yellow chairs, and two expensive-looking porcelain vases that were as tall as a person. Looking at the room, Steve started to panic. He asked the waitress,
What does this room cost?
Oh, this is our most luxurious room.
She said politely.
Prices start at $8,000.
$8,000.
Steve was shocked and more than a little nervous. He thought that this meal would cost $2,000 at the most, but $8,000? That was a lot.
Steve, how about we go to a different room?
Teresa suggested. She had never spent so much on a meal before, and Steve and Andrea were still students. How could they possibly afford to spend that much money?
It's okay, Mrs. Walters.
Steve said, wiping sweat from his forehead.
I like this room. Let's stay here.
He didn't want to be humiliated in front of everyone.
Sir, there's nothing to pay.
The waitress said with a smile.
Mr. Kim said that you were honored guests, and we're happy to have you in a restaurant. Your meal is on the house.
Free?
Steve felt like a prisoner who had suddenly been pardoned on his way to be executed. He was overjoyed. He looked at the waitress and noticed that she seemed a little starry-eyed, which was a little amusing.
Please take a seat.
She said.
We'll bring your meal shortly. They are all our best dishes.
She smiled and left the room.
Steve, you really do command respect.
Teresa said, sitting down.
Not only have you got us into the most luxurious private room, but you don't even have to pay for it.
She was extremely satisfied with this powerful boyfriend of Andrea's.
Exactly.
Glenda agreed.
What does your family do? Why are they so respected?
She was very interested in Steve.
My family have a small construction company, and it only earns $10 million a year. It's barely worth mentioning.
Steve said casually.
10 million is not worth mentioning.
Rosalie smiled at him. Then she glanced at Jeff, looked him up and down, and asked,
Young man, what does your family do? Do you earn several tens of thousands of dollars a year?
My family has no business, so how could I earn tens of thousands of dollars?
Jeff asked, not interested in talking to snobbish people. They all mocked Jeff for not having enough money. The waitress returned and brought several dishes to the table, including mushroom soup, pork chops, steak, salmon, and fruit salad. They didn't know which knives and forks to use, but Andrea showed them what to do. Lelaine and Jeff already seemed to know and helped explain it to Isabel. But weren't they just country bumpkins like Isabel?
How do you two know which knives and forks to use?
Teresa asked in disbelief.
Have you eaten in places like this before?
I used to work here part-time.
Lelaine said flatly.
For a minute there, I thought you ate in places like this all the time. But no, you were working for someone else.
Teresa sneered, then muttered softly.
No matter how much you know about fancy cutlery, it's a waste of time. It's not like you'll get much chance to eat expensive meals.
The door opened and Mr. Kim came in, bowing his head slightly.
How was your meal?
He asked politely, his gaze locked onto Jeff's face. Of course, he didn't dare make eye contact.
Very good.
Steve said, standing up and shaking Mr. Kim's hand.
Thank you for your hospitality, and we'll remember it. Mr. Kim is so polite.
He thought.
He even came over just to ask me if my food was okay.
Ah.
Mr. Kim wanted to speak to Jeff, but Steve didn't let go of his hand and was still standing there, smiling at him. Since he didn't know how close Steve and Jeff were, he couldn't object. He simply smiled amicably. Steve talked for a while, and then he finally let go of the manager.
To welcome everyone, I've picked out 2 special bottles of red wine.
Mr. Kim told them, gesturing to where a waiter had already brought in the 2 bottles. Smiling, he picked up a bottle. He wanted to place it in front of Jeff to show his respect.
Mr. Kim, you're too kind.
Steve said.
How can I accept?
He broke off in surprise when he looked at the bottle.
Ho! This is a Louis XIV from 1992. This is really expensive. Thank you, Mr. Kim. How did you know that I've always wanted to taste this?
Thank you. Super thanks purchase. At Anthony Larden 3671. for $10. Thank you so much for your support. August 2023, top super thanks purchasers. Thank you so much.